There's a question that many people have been asking lately. Is Squid Game based on a true story? Did the show's writer deny all the claims? Yes. But here's the shocking part. Squid Game might actually be inspired by one of the darkest, most horrifying events in human history. An event so brutal, almost no one talks about it. But what if Squid Game is actually a reflection of real, terrifying events that once happened? You've probably seen tons of videos asking the question, is Squid Game based on a true story? Some people say there was a secret game. Some say there are leaked photos showing the real place where it all happened. You've definitely seen the images going viral on social media, showing what looks like a real-life version of Squid Game. But before we dive into those photos, let me give you a quick introduction to the show. Squid Game is a South Korean series released in 2021 by Netflix. It became the most successful show in Netflix history. The concept? 456 people compete in deadly children's games for a prize of $38 million, but the cost is their lives. The show is brilliant. It's a dark reflection of human greed and how far someone might go for money. But here's the real question. Could something like this actually have happened? When I first saw the viral images, I believed it immediately. My brain said, it makes sense, this must be real. I mean, no one could come up with something this twisted unless they had real-life inspiration, right? Rich people playing with lives just for entertainment. With all the dark things happening in the world, it doesn't seem impossible. But then, the truth came out. Most of the viral photos were made by AI, artificial intelligence. This is the artist behind them. And honestly, his art is super creepy. But here's where it gets really strange. One of the photos that went viral wasn't AI generated. It was real. It showed people wearing outfits almost identical to Squid Game in a place that looked eerily similar. That's when I started digging deeper. I spent hours watching Korean documentaries, reading hidden reports, and searching through forgotten archives. What I found was disturbing. Something real, something twisted, something that lasted for years. And it destroyed the lives of thousands. The more I learned, the more I realized, the events in Squid Game might not be fictional after all. Keep watching until the end, because I'll try to prove that the creator of Squid Game may have actually been inspired by one of the darkest real events in history. The place you're about to hear about today was nicknamed the Korean Auschwitz. Yeah, that Auschwitz. You know what the German man did to his people back then. This place in Korea was his version. It all started in 1982, in South Korea. A 12-year-old boy named Young lived in the city of Busan. His father wasn't around. He took care of his sick mother, cooked for her, cleaned the house, and still, he was top of his class, a genius. One day, Young was late coming home. He'd gone out with a man from the neighborhood. Like many kids at the time, they had gone into the city. Imagine kids seeing the lights, the food, the noise. It was exciting. While they were playing in a park, the man left Young alone for a moment. That's when a police officer approached him. He asked, "What are you doing here?" Young replied honestly, and the officer said, "Come with me. I'll take you to the station and then drive you home." And of course, he trusted him. He was only 12, but Young disappeared. And he wasn't the only one. That year, many children vanished. Ordinary kids with loving families. Gone. The same year, another child, 14 years old, was walking home from school. A police officer stopped him, searched his bag, and found a piece of bread. He accused the boy of stealing it. The boy cried, "I didn't steal anything." But the officer kept yelling, "You stole it. Admit it." He began to beat him. Then he pulled out a lighter and burned the child's skin. The boy screamed in pain until he finally gave in. "Okay, I stole it. I stole the bread." That's when the officer dragged him to the station. And that was the last time anyone saw him. In 1983, a 7-year-old girl named Miss Lee was left with her baby brother at a police post while their dad ran to the shop. A police officer took them to the station. They disappeared. Same with a 15-year-old boy working at a Chinese restaurant. He took a short vacation to the beach in Busan. At the train station, police stopped him and accused him of stealing money. "I didn't steal anything," but they arrested him anyway. He was never seen again. Another girl, just 10 years old, was waiting for her brother at the train station. A police officer approached and said, "We'll take you to your brother," but she never saw her family again. And these aren't isolated cases. There were thousands of victims. What happened next? When they got to the police station, they weren't released. They were shoved into a van. Inside were elderly people, people with disabilities, women, a mix of people. The guards carried baseball bats. Surrounded by 7-meter-high concrete walls, the moment the doors shut, everything changed. People with baseball bats stood ready, and, without warning, they began beating them. No reason, no explanation. Behind those walls, life was no longer the same. Inside, there were massive buildings and cramped rooms. Some rooms held 80 to 100 people, sleeping on stacked bunk beds. The photos you've seen online, they're real. And the resemblance to Squid Game, it's not a coincidence. Everyone inside wore matching blue stripe uniforms. The moment those kids entered, they were beaten. Again, their heads were shaved. They were given one uniform and a single piece of underwear. And worst of all, their names were taken away. You weren't a person anymore, just a number. They were photographed and logged into a system that still exists today. The facility was in the middle of a forest, hidden from the world. Rows of bunk beds, identical uniforms, no names, just numbers. Sound familiar? But trust me, this was far worse than a TV show. Every day they were woken up at 5 a.m. by loud alarms. 80 people in each room rushed to line up. A commander would inspect them. Then they were forced into a huge outdoor yard. That's when they realized they weren't alone. There were thousands more. Elderly people, women, children younger than 7 years old, all standing in straight lines, all wearing the same uniforms, all surrounded by guards. Every morning, they sang a military-style anthem. If you got the words wrong, if you stood out of line, you were punished in front of everyone. So far, it sounds insane, right? But I haven't even told you what this place really was, why it existed. This facility had 20 factories and a huge church. Yeah, a church. Sounds innocent, right? Let me spoil something for you. That church might be the darkest place in the entire facility, but more on that later. Trust me, you haven't heard anything yet. What's coming next might actually make your stomach turn. And if you're sensitive to this kind of topic, maybe this is the time to leave the video. But if you're ready to hear the full story, subscribe now. We're about to go deeper.
They said it was a place to sleep, eat, learn a trade, and get an education. So after a year, you'd leave as a better citizen, ready for society. But let's go back in time. Let me tell you the true story of how this place came to be. After World War II, we're going way back now. But stay with me, because the history matters. After the Korean War, 1950 to 1953, many people began fleeing to large cities. One of them was Busan, the same city we talked about earlier. Busan's population exploded, from 280,000 in 1945 to over 1 million by 1955. And by 1985, over 3.5 million. The government and the rich looked down on these people. They were seen as homeless, as people with no steady jobs, sometimes no homes at all. Some lived in tents, some in wooden shacks. To them, these people were a problem. But the government didn't do much to help them. Why? Because they had no money, no budget, no care. That is, until a new president came to power in 1980, after a military coup. He took control, and in 1981, Korea was officially selected to host the 1988 Olympic Games and the 1986 Asian Games. Now, when a country hosts the Olympics, what do? They clean up. They want the world to see a perfect version of their country. And to them, the homeless were an embarrassment, a stain on the image of progress. Poor people, mentally ill, disabled, they were seen as dirty, uncivilized, a disgrace to society. And this new president? He doubled down on it. He ordered the streets to be cleaned up fast, so new welfare centers and rehabilitation facilities, like Brothers Home and others, were opened. And suddenly, the number of people disappearing off the streets began to rise. In 1983, over 14,000 people were taken. 1986, over 16,000 removed from the streets. The government paid the police bonuses for every person they collected. And guess what happens when you give money for bodies? They start taking everyone, not just the homeless. Anyone. Some were regular workers, sleeping outside on a break. Some were kids waiting at train stations. Some were people with homes, with jobs, even patients in hospitals. Disabled people too. And here's the shocking part. Only 10% of those taken were actually homeless. The police were supposed to get permission, a signature from the person being taken. And they were supposed to notify the family, but that didn't happen. Families never heard from their loved ones again. They just vanished. Why? Because the government was rewarding every single head delivered to these so-called rehabilitation centers.
One of the worst places people were taken to was called Brothers Welfare Center.
It was evil. Really evil.
Between 1975 and 1987, in just 12 years, over 40,000 people were locked up in that facility. And now, you're going to hear what kind of sick crimes happened there.
As I told you, there were 20 factories. Everyone was forced to work.
Children were forced to work extremely long hours. They did jobs that weren't even suitable for adults. But no one cared.
They used sharp tools, heavy machines, and if you didn't meet your daily quota, not only were you punished, but your entire platoon was punished.
Everyone was divided into groups of 80 to 100 people, and each group had a commander. If one person made a mistake, the whole group suffered. The punishments were brutal. The drawings you've seen, they're real, taken from a book written and illustrated by one of the survivors. He shared his story in 2021, nearly 40 years later. He said his body was covered in bruises every single day from beatings. And because the whole group was punished for one person's mistake, no one dared to speak up. No one even thought about resisting. He told a story about someone who once asked, "Why are we here? Can we leave?" The guards threw a blanket over him and started beating him. He was taken out of the room and never came back. The survivor says he's sure that man died from the beating. You couldn't ask questions. You couldn't complain. You couldn't do anything. And now you're about to hear something truly disturbing. There were separate women's platoons too. He says that regularly, many of the women ended up pregnant because of the guards, not by choice, not willingly. And when this happened, a few days later, a doctor would show up, give them injections, something unknown, and the problem would disappear. But it wasn't just the women. He says he himself was a victim of this kind of abuse. For 5 years, he endured it, every single day. He was only 14 years old when it started. The punishments and abuse happened in front of everyone, deliberately, to scare the others. But the sickest part, the guards and commanders doing the beating, they were also former victims themselves. When you enter this place, you start as a prisoner. But if you behave, they promote you. You become a guard or a commander. And if someone in your group messes up, you get punished too. So no one wants to risk anything. If someone even thinks about escaping and shares the idea with others, someone always tells the guards. Why? Because if they don't, someone else will, and everyone will be punished. The guards punish that one person to protect themselves, because if they don't punish him, they get punished. This was a system built on fear, pain, and betrayal. No one disobeys.
Because everyone was terrified. They were all victims, even the ones working there. The entire place was built by the hands of these people. One survivor named Choi tells a horrifying story. He says they were building one of the new buildings with their bare hands, stone by stone. One time, a man collapsed while lifting a heavy block. A guard saw him fall and killed him on the spot. And the reason? You're not ready for it. It's dark. And it's a direct reference to Squid Game too. Remember how in the show, the dead bodies were sold for organ harvesting and medical use? Yeah, same thing here. The bodies of the victims were allegedly sold to medical schools for dissection and training. That's how they made extra money. If a person could no longer work, there were other ways to profit off them. And trust me, it gets even darker. I've spent 3 straight days researching this. My sleep, my meals.
Everything has been disturbed by the horrifying testimonies of survivors. Many of them cry as they speak. They couldn't talk about this for decades. They were ashamed. Ashamed that a man, abused for 5 years, couldn't even tell his own story because the shame was that deep. Now I know you have a lot of questions like, how did the government not know? The truth is they did. They were funding it. The government paid the center for every single head they sent there. They were supposed to be providing food, education, shelter for each person. So how did this happen? How did no one notice? Well, here's another thing. The facility had a church. Remember that? We're coming to that part soon. But first, there's a very valid question you may be thinking. How do we have so many visuals? How do we have video footage of this place? Because they made TV commercials. Yes, they advertised the center on national television, showing it off as a model rehabilitation center. They bragged about how they were helping the homeless, teaching them skills, feeding them, showed smiling people, churches, kind volunteers, all lies. The survivors say they were forced to act in those commercials. They had to pretend. It was not optional. The ads were also used to collect donations. Yes, this place collected millions in global donations. They asked for food, warm clothes, anything to help the poor people there. But it was all a lie. None of the aid reached the victims. The people running the center took it all for themselves, and we'll get to who they were in a second. But let's return to the boy I mentioned in the first video, Jung, the 12-year-old. 2 years after being sent to the facility when he was 14, he saw something that shattered him. His father was there. His father, who had been searching for him, going from police station to police station, had turned to alcohol and became unstable. Eventually, the police took him too, threw him into a van, and sent him to the same place. Jung said that seeing his father didn't make him happy. It made him feel shame, because they both knew what was happening to them inside this place. And the food? There was never enough. The government was paying for food for 3,000 people, but the facility only fed 2,000. Why? To steal the rest of the money. Soon, we'd learn the names behind all this cruelty. The center bought 250,000 tablets of chlorpromazine, a heavy antipsychotic used to treat schizophrenia and bipolar disorder. They put this drug into everyone's food. It made people calm, but over time it caused permanent damage. Some victims became paralyzed, others turned into zombies, completely vacant, no longer human. This was hell, and I've only told you half of it. One survivor on Al Jazeera was left fully paralyzed from the beatings. Most of the survivors were left with severe mental illness. Many never finished school, never held jobs. They became burdens to society. The estimated number of people who died at the facility, 657. But even that number might be low. Who was behind all this? Meet Park In-kun, a former soldier, a former boxer, and according to survivors, he ran the place like Kim Jong-un. Nobody dared look him in the eye. He ruled with an iron fist, and just like Kim Jong-un, he trusted his family more than anyone else. His wife, Lim Soon-soon, helped him run the center. Her brother, Lim Young-soon, was the head pastor of the church. Her sister's husband, Jo Chung-shan, was also on staff. The whole family ran the place together. And in public, Park In-kun looked like an angel. In the promotional videos, he ate meals with the homeless, laughed, acted humble. He looked like a saint. But in reality, he made millions off the victims, and especially through the church. Which brings us to the next part. What really happened inside the church?
At first glance, the church seemed like a holy place, a Christian sanctuary meant to teach people about faith. Park In-kun, the man in charge, would regularly deliver sermons there. But what really happened behind the cameras was something far more sinister.
Yes, the church was also the courtroom. But what most people didn't know was that this place, built stone by the victims themselves, served a darker purpose. The court was there to punish only one so-called crime, trying to escape. They called it the greatest sin, using religious terms to frame disobedience as blasphemy.
Anyone who tried to escape was brutally punished. In one interview, a survivor said he attempted to escape over a dozen times. Each time, they dragged him to the office where everyone took turns beating him. Then, he was forced to wear a red garment labeled, "I am guilty. I disobeyed God's word," and brought in front of thousands of victims where Park In-kun would shout, "In the name of Jesus, you will be punished," before beating him with boxing gloves, publicly.
This man wasn't just abusive, he was evil. Reports suggest he was responsible for the deaths of over 60 people, and every time a punishment ended, they continued with a normal sermon as if nothing had happened, masking cruelty behind religion.
But the church wasn't just a courtroom. It also served two main purposes: collecting donations and attracting attention. To outsiders, it seemed like a shelter for the homeless, a place for Christian education and rehabilitation. Churches from around the world sent donations.
Victims themselves were forced to write thank you letters and ask for more support, saying things like, "Please send warm clothes. The weather in South Korea is cold." But the money and supplies went straight into Park In-kyun's pocket.
And it gets worse. The church also acted as a front for international child adoption. People believed they were adopting Christian orphans from South Korea. But the truth? These children had families, parents looking for them, and they were taken, adopted through agencies in the US and Europe, never to be seen again.
During holidays like Christmas or Easter, adoption agencies would visit. Victims were forced to put on shows, dancing, smiling, to make the place seem joyful and welcoming.
Eventually, some victims discovered a hidden underground storage full of clothing. Victims were given one outfit for the entire year, yet donations of clothes had clearly arrived. It turned out the donated clothes were being sold to merchants. Shockingly, Park In-kyun had been caught for a similar embezzlement case years earlier, and he did it again.
He exploited unpaid labor, stole food donations, and profited off charity meant for victims. The place had become a business, a front for abuse, fraud, and exploitation.
Eventually, the truth started leaking out.
Some survivors managed to get messages to the outside world. Some families had been filing complaints for years. The most widely reported story suggests that in December of a certain year, authorities finally started investigating, and everything began to unravel. He was out hunting with some colleagues when he saw something strange from a distance, children working in the woods. Guards were standing around them, holding baseball bats. He took photos and launched an investigation, and that's when everything began to unravel. The man running the center, Park In-kyun, pretended he knew nothing. He claimed innocence, saying, "You can't investigate me. I was appointed by people above, government officials." Yes, they had even appointed an official advisor for dealing with the homeless. The man who was president of South Korea at the time, Park, faced 2 charges: embezzlement and illegal detention of thousands of people. The second charge was mysteriously dropped, and in the end, he was sentenced to just 2.5 years in prison for embezzlement. His wife, nothing happened to her. The pastor, his brother-in-law, fled to Australia with a large portion of the stolen money and opened a new church. Park himself moved to Australia after serving his sentence. They built a golf club, which still exists today. That golf course was built on the blood and suffering of thousands of victims. Park died without ever facing justice. His children still own the golf club to this day. The survivors? Most still refuse to speak publicly. They carry deep shame from the things they endured. And 2 years after the investigation, the prosecutor who originally led the case came forward. He admitted he had faced enormous pressure from within the military and high-ranking officials in the government to keep the case quiet. He said, "I couldn't do anything more. That man was protected from the top." The Korean government knew. They knew everything. In 2012, survivors finally started speaking out. They held public protests, shaving their heads in front of government buildings, begging for any shred of justice. For years, nobody cared. In an Al Jazeera documentary, a legal expert said the Korean government didn't want any light shed on this case. They didn't want a trial that would draw attention. They wanted it buried. And to this day, almost no one knows this story. On May 20th, 2020, survivors officially requested a new investigation into what happened at the Brothers Welfare Center. To this day, not a single person, not a single one, has been truly held accountable. Now, do you see the similarities with Squid Game? The visuals, the uniforms, the isolated facility, the brutal punishments, even the timeline matches. Squid Game began filming in October 2020. This story came back into public light in May 2020. Is it possible the writer was inspired by this? Honestly, I think it's likely. The clothing, the locations, the themes, they line up too well. But in the end, the writer of Squid Game, Hwang Dong-hyuk, says he wasn't inspired by any real-life event. He claims it's just a metaphor for greed, desperation, and capitalism. Nothing deeper. Maybe that's true, maybe not. But I can't ignore the resemblance. And now you can't either. That's the story for today. Make sure to check out these 2 related videos. They'll blow your mind. Don't forget to subscribe. Thank you for watching.